Hi, Jason Brennenstol and Jared Longzine here. We're pastors here at Wildwood Baptist Church. And I wanted to talk together about what our reaction could be for the election. And I was thinking of the example of Joseph in the Bible. And I know it's not a perfect example. I know that Trump is not Pharaoh or Joseph, and we're not like that. But the corollaries and the comparisons seem to line up. And if you start with kind of the idea that Joseph's given this unprecedented opportunity to gather up the plenty that is promised, it seems like we're heading into a time of plenty. And so the idea is gathering up while there's good so that we're ready for the bad times. And how I arrived at that was kind of looking at the hardships that Joseph went through, and the hardships that America went through. So everybody's familiar with the hardships Joseph went through with the pit, and then sold into slavery, and then he's in Potiphar's house, and then he's in prison. How that stuff, the brothers said it was an anguish for Joseph to go through. He was in a terrible strait. Talk a little bit about how difficult it was on Monday in America before Tuesday.
Yeah, it was. It's a wild time. You know, the last really. You think about how weird politics has been the last 8 years with the advent of Donald Trump and all that, and the last 4, because you're really talking COVID on, has been a wild ride. And there's some false positives also going on. Increase of income, but also increase in inflation. Home values are going up, but it makes it super hard for people to buy new homes. Interest rates going up, so it makes it even more difficult for people to buy homes. And so there's some false fronts like, oh, the stock market's doing great. Yeah, but relative to inflation and relative to the increase of goods, you know, the stock market really isn't doing quite as well as we think. And when people are kind of going through these years of kind of famine, then that's really where you get to see the response to Trump. You know, with President Trump coming in, as people were sick of the idea of paying more at the grocery store. What did James Carville say to Bill Clinton in the 90s? It's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
You know, it's always about the economy.
Well, and then you think about, Joseph sitting in prison and thinking there's no hope. The day before he gets pulled to Pharaoh's house, his reputation is ruined. Everything is against him. And it's hard now. Here we are 2 weeks removed from, we'll say, the woke agenda. It's hard to remind ourselves how bad it really was with the tide of evil that looked like was going to fall on us. There could be in control of the House and the Senate. They could, the evil, the woke agenda, the filth that they're pushing on the schools and so on. But the difference from he's in prison and then the very next day he's in the palace talking to Pharaoh and affecting policy. Walk me through your feeling on that night of, the woke agenda is winning on Monday, and then on Wednesday, the woke agenda is pushed back decades.
And how much is 2020? You look back on Wednesday morning, you wake up, or maybe you stayed up. I don't recall if you did.
I did.
I felt comfortable enough. I was comfortable enough.
No, I stayed up.
Yeah. For all the late nights I've spent on election nights, that was not one of them. I went to bed having this confidence, but Wednesday morning, you feel some relief and things start making sense. And all of a sudden, all these, I guess, Wednesday morning quarterbacks, they start having, of course it was this way. Guys like Bernie Sanders say, well, you abandoned the working man. You totally abandoned him. You left the working man aside. Well, it's totally obvious when you know the entire story, when you're through it. I think that's a little bit of what we have on entering Tuesday is, well, man, it just seems like every time there's something you talk about woke, Title IX, you think of what they allow in the military, the allowance of transgender surgeries in prisons, and all these things that are going on. Like, are they ever going to stop? Is there ever victory? I think our country's too far gone. And then Wednesday you go, well, yeah, they totally abandoned the working man. The fact that unions all of a sudden weren't endorsing anybody, and they've traditionally endorsed a Democrat or whatever. Of course, it makes sense on Wednesday. And with Joseph, Of course it makes
Yeah.
sense. God was with him. God had his providential hand on him. And everywhere you watch Joseph, he was just doing the right thing. Of course it makes sense. It didn't make sense on Tuesday morning and certainly didn't make sense on Monday, but Wednesday it all makes sense.
Right. Well, and you can see two things: God working. So God was giving the butler and the baker the dreams. God was giving Pharaoh a dream. God was obviously bringing the butler back to Pharaoh, and so he's working. Also, Joseph was working in the sense that he was kind and gracious to the butler and the baker. He saw that they were sad, and this combination of God setting the stage, but also people, our church getting involved, the Get Out the Vote campaigns. There was a tremendous ground effort, obviously by the Republicans, and so the combination of people getting involved, people voting. I think there was a much better response from Christians this time around voting, and so God and man, and again, I'm not pulling God down to our level, but He works with people who take responsibility, and so both of those working together, brings this great result.
I do think it's when you look at the Bible, you see learning moments.
Yeah,
And Joseph, for whatever situations happened to him in the past, he never gets bitter. He just continues to work. He continues to do the right thing. And as bad as it had been, the Donald Trump rigged election stuff of 2020, whether or not it was rigged,
right.
certainly there was a better effort and a smarter effort by the opposition. So now you look at 2024, and there's a much better response to that. They're like, okay, we're not defeatist. We're going to play the same game they are. Not in terms of necessarily doing things that are unethical, but there was clearly a much different feel, I think, at least from the outside coming into our church.
Yes.
Different organizations and all that you kind of see floating around. We played to win, or our side seemed to play to win. The last time it was like, I don't know what we're going to do. It's just a rigged election. Man, that's such a loser talk.
Yes.
And Joseph was never a loser. Joseph's a winner. No matter what the situation, he always took the high road. He always took the winning position.
I really like that. And I never really thought about that, but he reminds me of Abraham Lincoln in the sense of all of these defeats all the way in a row until it mattered. And it wasn't the optimist, the what syndrome that
The Stockdale syndrome.
right. It's not, well, tomorrow it's going to happen. But it doesn't matter if tomorrow it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, but I'm just not going to quit.
Yeah.
And that attitude of I will not quit regardless of the outcome brings success to Abraham Lincoln, but it brings success to Joseph, and I believe brought success to the conservative movement because they didn't just simply say, America's gone, why try? Why vote because it doesn't matter? Let's still be a part of the process.
I think, you talk about not quitting. If there is a virtue that President Trump has, and sometimes it's hard to look at. Sometimes it's very hard to find a virtue. If he's got a virtue, he doesn't quit.
Right.
He just keeps going. And obviously the assassination attempt where he gets shot in the ear. I mean, what does he immediately do? It's fight. And, there's a lot of things to criticize, and there will probably be a lot of things to criticize over the next 4 years. But he's been a prime example of just never quit. Just keep going, just keep going, just keep going.
I mean, how toxic was he January 7th, 4 years ago? And regardless of what your opinion on is January 6th, it was still a bad look. And most of America turned their backs on him. And everybody said, it's done, he's over with, we're finally, of course, the enemies would say, we're finally rid of him. And here we are, less than 4 years later. I mean, you cannot write a more dramatic script than that.
No, it's, and we use hyperbole like the greatest American political comeback.
Right.
I don't know, Garfield, or Grover Cleveland obviously is a big one. This is pretty wild. I mean, this is a very wild situation, but it probably speaks to how bad the economy is.
Yes.
It probably speaks to how bad the environment is.
Yeah.
If you have this binary option between, Mrs. Harris and Mr. Trump, and people are like, we'll go with Mr. Trump. But regardless, the guy is an example of persevering.
Yeah.
And if there is some sort of biblical connection you want to make, it's going to be that Trump was a fighter, never stopped. Joseph just kept going. He was so consistent, almost boring in what he did.
Yeah.
And it's a virtue.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So Joseph is in prison. He shaves himself. He tries to get the best robes he can on, but it's still prison garments. And he goes to Pharaoh's house thinking, I'm just going to be there for a little bit. When he walked out of that meeting with Pharaoh, he's got the ring on his hand, the robe on his back, the authority in his pocket, a mandate, a mission, the dramatic change and the power he wielded. Talk a little bit about your reaction to winning the presidency, the Senate, the House, the popular vote with the conservative Supreme Court. You can't have much more of a trifecta than that.
No, you can't. What the Joseph story reminds me of, if we're doing a little bit of contrast and comparison to right now, it's really the book of Esther.
Oh, yeah.
Esther
That's
and
good.
Mordecai. Now I know some people will try to overly spiritualize Esther and Mordecai. I take a much more a negative approach on them. I don't think they were quite as spiritual as they probably should have been and all that stuff. But God's providence is clearly seen in the book of Esther, and God's providence is clearly seen in Joseph's time, because God has an agenda, and specifically whether it's Joseph or whether or not it's Esther, is to preserve his people. You know, they both have that same outcome. It's a preservation of his people. And I know we're going to go through bad times. Eventually, a Democrat or whoever is going to be the nominee for president, and it'll flip. And we've been around long enough. But that being said, we do have a reprieve. We have some movement. And if someone would have said, it's kind of like Mordecai and Haman. Mordecai and Haman. Haman is setting up the
Gallows.
The gallows, and who ends up on the gallows? It's Haman. And who ends up with the outfit, the parade, the everything? It's Mordecai. Mordecai ends up the victor. And and that's just like our God. That no matter how dark it is, that what's the old phrase there? It's always darkest before the sunrise. And here we go. We kind of look and go, is it morning in America again? Is it this idea that whether Mr. Trump is saying it's the golden age of America? Maybe it will be the next 4 years. You have no idea. Of course, it could be awful terrible too. There's a lot you don't know.
So let's talk about the gathering while there's plenty. So he has all this power and authority, and God has promised to give Egypt unprecedented wealth. And obviously that was a very unique thing, but the earth was going to give by handfuls and was going to last for 7 years. And I know this is not a biblical prophecy, but I just saw a correlation between America's prosperity under capitalist conservative policies that generally lend itself to a better society, more prosperity, more innovation. And so I do believe that, let's say all things equal, there's not a pandemic or something like that, but all things equal, generally speaking, America is going to prosper in the next 4 years. And God's message was twofold. It's going to happen, but also be wise about that. Invest in the future. Gather that up. Don't let it waste. Don't let it waste in the fields. And
well, so I've been very I don't know, bullish is the word, but bearish. I don't know if bearish would be in the negative side of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've been very critical of any federal leadership the last 20-some years. Last time we had a balanced budget was during the Bill Clinton years, 2000. 2001 happens, you get 9/11 and all that. We have not had a balanced budget in 24 years. It's a wild, wild ride we've been on, and now it's $36 trillion in debt and all this stuff. Well, it looks like Mr. Trump really is going to be taking an earnest look at government efficiency. I don't know if it's going to happen.
Right.
I have no idea what's going to work, but the thought of lowering expenses from the federal perspective, getting money into the hands of us or other people, that is the engine that moves our country forward. It's capitalism that moves the country forward. Government shouldn't be steering the economy. It should be consumers and producers that are steering the economy. And I really think there's an opportunity for our government to spend less. Bill Clinton in '96 said the era of big government is over.
Right.
Oh boy, that was just the beginning of it. But if we could switch it, switch the thoughts around and go, government isn't here to fix all the problems. Government actually doesn't fix problems, makes them worse. We really have an opportunity over the next 4 years to minimize it And since we're talking church, that's the
Yeah,
focus. This is the best opportunity we have as a church to reach out to the community and say, no more taxes.
Yeah.
Let's not tax people.
Yep.
Let's lower the tax burden. Let's get more money into the hands of the fixed income, the middle income, low income. Let's stop having this burden of the inflationary spending, which is a tax in and of itself. It's really a golden opportunity the next 4 years.
Yeah, it really is. And so that's at the macro level. At the micro level, I'm not a betting man in the sense of I can guarantee it will happen, but I suspect that the average man's level of living will increase. His wages will increase. There'll be more innovation. There'll be more factories. There'll be more vacation time. And my challenge for Christians and churches would be, if God blesses you with more, give more to your church. And I know it's a little self-serving because I'm part of the church here, but it would be wonderful to see our tithes increase. Now, there's a direct correlation between what Joseph did and what we should do. Joseph gathered while there was plenty, not to hoard it, but so that he could then help people with it. And if you're going to a good church and God blesses you with more, then determine to give more, because that good church would then just start more ministries and build bigger buildings. And I know people can easily criticize and say, well, you're just kingdom building. Well, I'm hoping I'm building God's kingdom.
Yeah,
and
right. Yeah.
If we can build a bigger auditorium or have another bus route or whatever it may be, it's still only a cup out of the ocean of the need. And so if there is prosperity in the next 4 or 5 years, boy, let's do everything we can to invest more in missions, invest more in God's work, so that we are receiving and giving more. And I'd much rather invest it here than anywhere else.
Yeah, I don't know if the stat, I don't know how true it is, but I heard it floating around, but it was 85 cents on every dollar that goes to foreign missions comes from the United States.
Wow.
And if you can get that engine of the United States going, it maintains what we're doing in foreign missions, that we can affect what's going on in Zambia, we can affect what's going on in Puerto Rico or whatever other country. And not just sending the money out, but the local mission of helping marriages. I think one of the great faults of our nation right now, and it's not real popular to talk about, but it's the weakness of our families.
Yeah.
You know, and we've depended too much on the government to do what the father and mother should be doing, which is providing for their own family. And it's broken those families apart because it's actually better financially not to be together than be together. So I think this provides an opportunity to build families. And if the government's going to lean into something, it should be away from the woke agenda and towards building traditional families, homes with a mom, a dad, and they're raising their own children or adopting or whatever it is. But the idea of mom and dad together doing the best they can. What's the level of success in our nation? You wait till marriage to have children. You stay together and have at least a high school education. It's like a very high percentage of those people are not in poverty. Mm. So if we can get those kind of local in our own church and in our community to get to that level, what a fantastic local and hopefully national prosperity we have.
So we've got financial prosperity, and if God brings it, then we should invest as much as we can for the Lord. And then Joseph did something very interesting that aligns, I believe, with conservative principles, and it might be a little bit of an extrapolation on my part, but when he gathered the bread, he didn't just give it out freely. It wasn't welfare. He actually sold it for different pieces, whether it was cattle or whatever, and there was a personal responsibility on the part of the people. And boy, I would love to see not only in this 4 years of prosperity, gathering money to invest in the eternal, but also the principles of conservatism, the principles of capitalism, and that would translate to laws, and that would translate to people in positions. Let's get conservative philosophy as deep as we possibly can into government. Local elections, laws that are passed, policies that are set forward. That I believe is one of the things that set Egypt up for long-term success. I mean, they were successful for hundreds of years after that, and I think it was largely because of Joseph.
What does Ronald Reagan say the best social program is? a job.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that idea of just getting people setting up in their own homes,
Right.
getting them to be a part of the economic system. There's nothing. How much better does a kid who buys their own things, Legos and all that, treat their own possessions versus when they're given those things?
Right.
If you're given everything in life, you don't treat them quite as well. So if you can actually get people to invest into buying their own homes over renting, they're going to treat that property better. Their property will be better maintained. Neighborhoods will be improved. If you can get them, and we're in a borrowing, and when I mean borrowing, I don't mean we're borrowing more money, although we may. People are buying less things and renting them out. They stream music. They don't buy CDs or albums. They don't buy DVDs or Blu-rays. They stream them. People are less and less frequent to buy homes. They're renting them. In fact, bigger cities, they're not buying cars. They're using Uber or whatever. And if we can get people to be part of they're buying things, that means they're going to take care of things better because it's actually theirs.
That's a good point. And one of the tendencies would be to be less involved while the political climate is favorable, because we don't feel the need. We don't feel the pressure. We're not getting in the news with the school board. But I think the exact opposite. Now is the time that the tides have shifted, that it's not a hot button issue, that probably people have backed off of boys and girls restrooms and so on. They're either going to back off the agenda or just do it quieter, because obviously the winds have changed. But now is the time to go for a school board. Now is the time to get in there, flip the majority, and not wait until it's a problem and we're down 5-1.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big thing is anger does motivate people. That frustration, that's the 2020 stuff. That's the whole COVID. We had all those people at the local county meeting. Yeah. We'd had people at the city council meeting. We had people, and then all of a sudden, a year or two goes by, and it's gotten quieter. And I know presidential elections are always way noisier, but this is really the time where you can affect. And if you fall asleep, there's a super important election coming in Wisconsin in April. Yeah. Super important. And there's a statewide election, Supreme Court justice and all this. Super important. Well, if you fall asleep because you feel good, Donald Trump is not going to fix your problems. In fact, he's going to do less than the Wisconsin Supreme Court or the county executive or fill in the blank. And those people matter, certainly policy-wise, more and more often, more frequently than the president does. Yeah.
One last thing about Joseph, and again, it's my own comparison, but when he got into power, his first meeting with his brothers, his heart was pure in the sense that he did genuinely, sincerely want to extend forgiveness. And we know that he did eventually extend forgiveness. But I think it's so critical to learn from Joseph in the sense that he still stood on the truth. He still was cautious when they came, and he made them say out loud what they did. In a sense, it's this image of true repentance. And so he's compassionate. He gave them bread. He helped them. He was kind, but he didn't compromise on the truth. And one of the things about Republicans that drive me crazy is that once they have the upper hand, it's like the very next thought is, how can we see common ground with the enemy? How can we make it conciliatory? Like, this is not the time to compromise. This is the time to stick to the truth that we've believed. I still want to extend love and welcome to people who disagree with me, obviously disagree with the Word of God, whether it's transgender or homosexual, but they have to do it. That compassion is extended based upon the truth, based upon you extend it because they have true repentance.
The idea of elections have consequences, and generally when it's flipped around, that's when you see a wave of change. And what are conservatives mostly concerned with? We just want to leave it alone.
Yeah, right.
Which is fine to a point, but really, if you're thinking Mr. Trump, he's got 2 years really. Generally, midterms start swinging the other way. The point is, we elected certain people to get certain things done. Now, it's not a complete mandate. Not 100% of the people voted for Mr. Trump or any of the other candidates, but The elections do have consequences,
Right.
and it should be a significant change. There is a reason why someone who is as flawed as Mr. Trump won, because people were sick of the same
Right.
old. And so if they don't take advantage of it, it's a real shame.
It is. Yep, it is. And compromise in this situation, we can certainly compromise on preferences. We can compromise on matters of opinion. But I sure hope that the Republicans who stood against these things, it seems like the loudest pro-life voices are ones who don't have a vote. And then once they actually get in power and get the vote, then they're like, well, I didn't really believe that. And that's a shame.
Yeah.
And I sure hope that those who stood for pro-life legislation, who were anti-woke, anti-DEI, for girls' sports rather than boys playing, I really hope that they stick to their guns and stand for the truth. And my encouragement for churches is, as loud as we were before, and I really appreciate the point you made about anger, and I think it's righteous anger. I'm sick to my stomach when I find out what they're doing in the schools and the deviance and the awful books and stuff that they shove in the face of our public school kids. Well, that same hard line for the truth, mixed with compassion, like I'm still going to love them and try to win them for Christ, but I'm not changing the truth, should still be our stance today. And Joseph is such a good example of that.
Yeah, we got 2 years.
Yeah.
It feels good when you win, but there's complacency in winning. A lot of times you learn more when you lose. Yeah. And I hope people really lick their wounds about what it was like to lose in 2020, or even when Mr. Obama won in 2008. The government really shifted from 2008 to 2012. And if you're not paying attention, same thing can happen again the next time they're in charge. So we have an opportunity and really an obligation to make sure that we're setting up our country to prosperity.
Yeah.
Use capitalism as the device to do it. Government isn't the solution. Government is the problem.
Well, and we know there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. It was a long time, and he set him up for a long time prosperity, but he knew that wasn't their home, that they eventually were going to go to the promised land. And I know that that's a little bit more of a correlation that I'm making, but right. I know Christ is coming back, that eventually my loyalties obviously should be lying in heaven, and we're looking for Christ to return. But I sure would like prosperity and a good climate for church up until that point, so that we can propagate the gospel as best we can.
It's basically, as long as I can to get the government to leave me alone, That's my goal.
Absolutely.
And if I can keep more money and I can help more people, that's fantastic. We're not promised any of that, but as long as we can, we should fight, to quote Mr. Trump, to do that, because I want to make sure my kids, best I can, have an actual capitalistic system that believes in freedom, and they can be left to succeed.
Yeah. Well, make a plan to gather while there's plenty. I think that we are heading into a political and conservative climate, possibly even affect our bank accounts, but also affect our opportunities. And we'll have more opportunities to share the gospel, and it'll be a more favorable winds. But we got to use it wisely, hit the ground running, try your best, and God bless you. And I appreciate spending some time with you. Thanks a lot.